This is Danny Flexen here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined by former superb fighter, but now an expert pundit, Dan Hardy. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm really good, mate. Really good. Good to be talking to you.
Yeah, and you. UFC 257 just round the corner, live on BT Sport, and then BT Sport box office, of course, for the main card. Very excited, of course, about the return of Conor McGregor. A year, roughly, since we've last seen him in the octagon. And I guess I want to ask you first of all, how, as well as you know him, how will that time off have affected him, and what will he have been doing in the gym during that period?
Honestly, I think Connor's one of the few people that isn't really affected by time off. And I think the reason for this is because when Connor steps back into the sport, he changes the sport. When he steps away, it's not the same for anybody. So I think he always commands the sport, the octagon, very well. I don't think the time off really will do anything negative towards him. And I think his investment of that time will most likely be, bolstering his arsenal. Working on his conditioning. His condition looks incredible, best I've ever seen him in by a long way. But the precision of that left hand is still going to be sharpened over the last 12 months. I also think we're going to be seeing more of his grappling if he's pushed to it as well. You can't come off a training camp against Khabib and work all that takedown defense without getting a better offense as well. So I think the more time Conor spends away from the sport, the more he becomes a better mixed martial artist, and it's just going to make him more dangerous. Especially because he's a bit of an unknown commodity, given the fact that we only see him for 40 seconds a year. like who knows what he's going to come in with this one. No one could have predicted the shoulder strikes in the last one. Like, he might be flying triangles this time around.
Yeah, those shoulder strikes were particularly effective against Cowboy Cerrone, and it wasn't long, as you alluded to. And we've seen his opponent next week, Dustin Poirier, in action more recently, back in June, and he went the full 5 rounds in a competitive fight. Is that a slight advantage? I know you said that Conor doesn't suffer from not being in the octagon for as long as he has, but from Poirier's point of view, he's kind of iron sharpens iron. He's been in there more recently and in a higher level fight.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit from coming off the Hooker fight, especially if Poirier is honest with himself and he looks at that fight and says, I lost those first 2 rounds. Because if this fight goes past the first 2 rounds, that's where it starts to get really interesting for Poirier. I mean, even if he gets past the first round, but if he gets into the later rounds, he's going to have to claw himself back on the scorecards. I just don't see him coming out and dominating from the first round. I think he's going to give the first round if he doesn't get knocked out. I think he'll probably give the second round as well, because McGregor will still be, very present, very conditioned, and pushing him back. But it's that slow erosion from Poirier that works his way into the fight, and that's what we saw against Hooker. He took all of his best shots in the first 2 rounds, and then he started to come on strong. And I think that there's a lot of confidence that he can take from that. Not only that he took a lot of Hooker's good shots, same thing with Gaethje, a big puncher in this division. Like, Hooker's not necessarily a big puncher, but he's a high volume puncher. Gaethje's a big puncher, so he's got both sides to the game that he's reassured himself he can deal with, and he knows that if he's got 3 rounds to go, even if he's lost the first 2, he can get the win on the scorecards. And honestly, if Poirier is going to win, it's going to be a late DAS or it's going to be a judge's decision.
And we saw, obviously, these guys first fought way back in 2014. We know a great deal about what McGregor's achieved since, but for people out there who aren't as aware about Poirier's achievements and accomplishments, what ways predominantly would you say he's improved in the last 6 to 7 years?
I think there's a lot of improvements in his game, but they're only minor improvements. The Poirier that we saw in the WEC is the same guy that we see now. There are slight refinements. His punching combinations have become slightly more diverse. He's added elbows and knees to his game. I mean, even against Hooker, we were seeing those like hammer fists up against the fence. There are other facets he's added to his game, but the foundation of it's still fundamentally the same. He's an aggressive boxer that squares up his stance. He likes to punch and step through from southpaw to orthodox to cover distance. And he's got that Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt that's just in his back pocket if he needs it. The biggest difference for me is that obviously he's 10 pounds heavier in this weight class. And I think that 10 pounds has translated into muscle mass in the areas that he needs it the most. like around his neck, shoulders, and chest. Like they're the places that you want to bolster the muscle mass so you can take a better punch. And if he can take a better shot in those first couple of rounds, he's got a much better chance of getting it into the deeper waters where he can be successful.
How important is the extra kind of range and length that McGregor has in this fight?
It's very important as long as he can use it. And I mean, the thing is, there's not a great deal of difference between the two. And I would say that the biggest difference, I mean, is it 2 inches in reach? I think 72, 74. Yeah. Like I would say a lot of that reach is shoulders. Like Conor's got a very broad shoulders and back. And the other thing as well is, if you watch the way Conor fights, I mean, I broke it down in the War Room. If you watch the top shot of a lot of his knockouts, like the Brandao one, the Mendes one, like the full extension on the left hand, the distance between the left foot and the left hand is ridiculous. Like he uses every inch of that reach. Whereas Poirier, even though he's only a couple of inches behind, he stands on a skateboard, he stands right in front of you, he squares up, and all of his punches come in loops. So the range is really useful for McGregor if the fight's at range. If it starts to get closed down, it makes very, very little difference, because that's where Poirier is in his face, he's standing on his toes, and then those shorter hooking punches, as you know from Mike Tyson, who's got one of the most shortest reaches in the heavyweight division, short, powerful hooks are much easier to generate with shorter arms. So I think there is a benefit as long as Poirier can get it into his range.
But then from that point of view, McGregor also likes to sometimes close the range and come in from kind of a 45 or 90 degree angle to whip those left hands across rather than straight on. So there's a danger for Poirier up close as well, right?
Well, I mean, there is. The danger of Poirier is more... I mean, the thing is, like, the two ways that McGregor applies the left hand, if they're moving away from him, they're usually moving along the fence, and he usually punches them across the chin along the fence. But that also allows him to reset that pattern and cut 2 panels off and then restart it on the other side of the octagon. The other way is when they're closing distance on him and he just gives a little space, little slip to the outside of their right hand and then counters. It's slightly different in this one, given the fact that he's fighting another southpaw, because he's going to have to slip his head into a position which is not necessarily as comfortable for him. He's either going to be slipping as the punch comes in, so he's going to have to try and time the jab, or he's going to have to give range. He's going to allow Poirier to move forward so he can counter him on the way in. Like McGregor always tries to use his range, and even when the fight's being closed down, he's very good at creating space so he can still fully extend that left hand. I mean, you watch the Eddie Alvarez fight. Like he coaxed Eddie Alvarez to walk onto that punch. It wasn't the first one that landed because that was quite a short range punch. I mean, Eddie covered distance really quickly. But if you take that exact same finish and you look at his knockout over Ivan Butchinger, which was a much, much cleaner finish, the only difference between the two is that Eddie was covering distance with much more confidence. So if he can get inside Poirier's head, if he can make him a bit hesitant covering that distance, it will buy him an extra half second to fully extend the left. But as I said, in the Alvarez fight, it went left, right, left, and the fight was still over. And he didn't even really land the right hook. It was much more of a tilt for the second left hand to come. It's the application of that left hand that's his expertise. And if he needs to create a bit of space for himself to do it, he can. It's much more about feeding off what his opponent's doing and where their confidence is.
And just before we let you go, I want to put this event into a wider context of McGregor's career. He's already achieved so much. He's been a pioneer in many areas. What is left for him in terms of kind of dream achievements? What can he still do to etch his name further in the record books?
Honestly, I think there's a lot for him to do. I mean, from the outside, we've seen the photos of him with a belt over each shoulder. We've seen him knock out the featherweight and the lightweight champion and get the belt, and they've been incredibly impressive. The thing that's going to hang over him, and the thing that all fighters are going to keep reminding him of over the years, is that he's never defended a belt. Now, I think this is the third time he's fighting at It's the third time he's fighting at 155, and every single fight's been for a title. This is the first time that it's not. That just shows you the kind of person that he is, the kind of opportunities that he creates without having to go through what Poirier had, 8-9 wins before he got a shot against Khabib. Like McGregor doesn't have to earn his stripes quite like everybody else does. So that's slightly different. And I think that might hang over him because that allows him to leapfrog people and somewhat bypass some of the other records that he would probably like. Like I would say he probably wants a couple of title defense. I'd say he probably wants the 170-pound belt as well. And it wouldn't surprise me if he wants to hold 2 belts simultaneously again. Obviously, it's not going to be 145. But I could certainly see him going after the 55 belt and then maybe up to 170 and then settling for a BMF title shot against Masvidal. Like, there's lots of things that McGregor could still do in the game, and none of them are about money, which is what makes me even more excited.
Great stuff. Dan, it's always a pleasure. Look forward to the big fight next week and hope you enjoy it as much as we do.
Nice one, mate. Good talking to you.
Cheers,
Speak to you
mate.
soon.
Take care.